Thank you so much for coming to Book Passage today. It's a gorgeous day outside, and to have so many wonderful people supporting the bookstore, we are just thrilled to have you. Before we begin, if you can check that your cell phones are off, I would really appreciate that. My name is Monica Golden, and I will be your host for this afternoon's event. Book Passage is honored to welcome you to an afternoon of poetry with authors from 16 Rivers Press, Sarah Baratalis, Helen Wicks, and Lisa Robertson. First, we'd like Murray Silverstein with 16 Rivers Press to come up and say a few words about the press, and then I will go ahead and introduce the poets. Does that sound good?
Sure. And Stella.
Excuse me?
Stella, not Sarah.
Oh, I'm sorry, did I say that? Oh, I apologize.
Stella!
What's your last name?
Okay, so a few words about the publisher who's behind the three books you'll hear from today. 16 Rivers is a collective press, Northern California poetry-only press. A collective that is started and is run by poets, which makes the fact that it exists has existed for 16 years and has published over 30 books, a miracle, up there with the fishes and the loaves. And its mission is to publish new poets, generally 2 a year, and offers a second book policy for second book publishing of authors whose works have been accepted as first books. My own book was published by the press in 2006. There's, what did I say, over 35 books. We've also had projects that included anthology, CD. We've done one book of translations and another in the works, and a collected of Larry Fixel's poetry, which is due out in the fall, maybe. So it's various press, but mainly what we're interested in is the work of new poets. And we have a blind submission period that goes on several months each year. Information available on our website, so we encourage you to submit or tell your friends about the press. And with that, I will turn it over to Monica to introduce our readers.
So our first reader today is Stella Baratalis. Did I get that right? Her debut collection of poetry, called Alkali Sink, weaves together themes of her family's Greek culture, loss, and the natural world. Her poems transform ordinary acts into extraordinary ones. With startling imagery and touches of humor, Alkali Sink introduces an original poetic voice. Helen Wicks' fourth poetry collection, called World as You Left It, is an extended elegy for her parents, her childhood, and the farm where she grew up. The poems blend anger, praise, and love for an imperfect world with startling poetic images and exuberant language. In Lisa Robertson's newest work, entitled The Orbit of Known Objects, themes of family origin, loss, love, and regret are explored. Rooted in the Deep South, this stunning collection solidifies Robertson as a poet to savor. Please give a warm Book Passage welcome to Stella, Helen, and Lisa.
Thank you so much. And thank you for coming on this warm Saturday afternoon. I would like to start off by reading, I think I'm going to read a cluster of poems that generally treats the subject of being a Greek American and some of the weirdness involved in that. It's probably present with anyone that is growing up in between two different cultures. My mom was born on Crete and in fact is in Greece right now. So Raisin Queen, this first poem, is actually based on a photograph of my grandmother who was standing by a flag, and apparently she was a harvest princess in Fresno when she was growing up. So Raisin Queen. I want to be the Raisin Queen of Fresno. and I'm taking concrete steps to get there. Curled hair and rouged cheeks, fine enunciation, and a good dress are required. A Raisin Queen is given latitude. I can take a leave of absence from my duties, hike the Appalachian Trail. I can go to Flagstaff, then maybe cross national borders. But on this first day, I'll stand at the town square flagpole in my festival attire, a goddess of the raisin trade. The photo shows a girl lost inside her dreaming, imagining salami and beer and one of her dead fathers. Yes, Greek people eat salami and they drink lots of beer. I was supposed to be timing myself with my telephone just in case you're wondering why I brought it up, so let me do that now. A vivid memory that I have as a child is I grew up in Pleasanton, and we had relatives in the Bay Area, and every spring, whenever the greens were growing on the side of the road, my mom would stop on the side of the freeway, and so we'd have to pick a bunch of greens. And it was one of those eye-rolling moments, you know, as a child. I just thought, oh God, we have to do this again. But now, I see how special that was. Mustard greens, Interstate 580. With enough olive oil and lemon juice, it was easy for her to overlook the occasional woody stem, their bitter tang, roadside mustard, dandelion greens, right there at the freeway's side. First a bag, then the entire trunk stuffed full. She came to carry a knife in the glove box to cut the juicy weeds of this new country, while her husband laughed at the provincial poverty of it all, eating greens that had been basking in car fumes and animal piss. Yet for her, hunger was not just a distant thought, but a chemical memory in her muscles, her jaws. And out here was a veritable sound of music, the hills alive, nourishing the village she carried, whispering, yes, we will feed you. These are new melodies of unyellowed mustard in early spring, songs of fullness, love, the crunch underfoot as she scouts the freshest bunch, the squeak of swaddling in clean flour sack towels, the drive back in the brown Le Sabre, shrugging off banana boat comments. Later, at home, she washes up a sink load and boils it gently for an hour. Everyone eats. I think all of us Greek American poets have to have poems about greens. Memory's Nettles. Do you remember biting into the soggy forkful of dark stem and leaf, tasting the startling sweetness of Greek mountain afternoon? In that rocky lot dotted with wild cyclamen, your sisters, my aunts, walking slowly, pointing out clumps with their knives. The oldest, my namesake in widow's black, telling the story of boiled nettles, and the soldier who, missing his own young daughter, wanted to adopt you. We young women, always the American girls with tied tongues and half-understanding smiles, know nothing except the greens. That day we picked Armira, Italica, Vlita, Radicia, stuffed our weeds into plastic bags and walked to Leah's, where we removed the roots, bathed the greens in a large zinc tub, and tossed them into a pot of boiling water. I, steak knife in my hand, racked my brain for a word. Remember? I might have to do a knife theme for my poems. I'm going to dig through here and see. Wow. When I see his cane. He sleeps in the hallway, warding off vengeful angels and thieving neighbors, his voice rasping, I fought in the war and I can't get any quiet in this house. He sounds like the devil. He eats his bowl of milk and bread, arranges 3 blankets with care. What matters now are milk and sleep. He makes his bed on the couch. In this house, he sleeps in the hall, but inhabits every room. He recites the names of 19 Cretan villages, then presents me his cane, a gift I don't want. Inapurnari, he says, a tree grown for its bent roots. The cane's wood is lined, pitted, harder than chairs broken over the backs of women and children. Did he understand this 50 years ago as he led his daughters into hidden coves, chased them onto wind-swept peninsulas, shoulder-rode them into dark places? Looking for the time. Dinner interrupted by paperboy. And I think this actually happened. I was very young, and my mother told me about a dinner we were having, and the paperboy knocked on the door. Dinner interrupted by paperboy. In the Middle East and even less fertile areas, there are sheep and goats. So it was in California, the skulls of 2 lambs on a plate one night with company. You'd be surprised what a roasted head looks like. The eyes an unlikely white, long tongues in permanent lull, cheeks roasted to juicy rounds. All of us sat around the table, my wife, my ma, Kokinos and his woman, and Burani with the blind eye staring at nothing. When the doorbell rang, my wife jumped, upsetting the table. Glasses of wine teetered, the flatware chinked against itself, and for a moment, Koritsimu, we stared as those lamb heads wobbled in the center of the table. When everything settled, she rushed for a clean white towel, whirled and draped it over the table magician style, concealing our pagan feast. Later, Kokinos, carving out the tongue, said, so much of what's delicious requires work on the part of the eaters. Yes, here's to Kokinos, dying of the cancer now inside every one of his bones. A split skull is a gift. This awful, the world's heart and soul, transformed by sleight of hand and time. What a treasure it was to eat those odd meals. Actually, they're wonderful. I shouldn't say they're odd. Okay. This poem, Patterson Paths, is a poem that was in the anthology The Place That Inhabits Us. And it is a familiar scene driving from the Central Valley to the Bay Area. Patterson Paths. This is the place that inhabits us, the place where inversion, layering down, spills water into trough and tap of valley. Altamont of my rib, aqueduct of your chest, anchor of homes, totem of tract and sky, tied up in blue's drawstring bag. Below me, you, and sky above, all that dihedral flight distilled down to seep spring monkey flower. This landscape has settled into a familiar refrain, kestrel, kite, shrike, redtail, folding into the blade, sometimes a crow, sometimes a man saying, hey, an exhalation. Here, uncertainty does not seem complex, loaded as it is onto crackling pallets and driven off to substations of the West. Wind, and how we don't understand the farming of it, how the mills hum, moan, susurrate hoarsely, how the skin cartwheels into windmills, electromagnetic field, or the houndstooth scoring of riparian beds, or the sleek catwalk of girder. We can't see the tomorrowland of here, only a cow's 4 feet plugged into the hills. There's something special about agriculture too. The valley is the breadbasket of the world. And I opened the book actually with a poem called Coda Farms, South dos Palos. And this is kind of inspired by a friend of mine whose family, the Coda family, has had a rice farm in South dos Palos for, at least 60 years. And they lost their business during World War II, and it was continued to be run by a friendly neighbor, a business person, and then when the war was over, they have their farm back again, and it has continued on. Anyway, Coda Farms, South dos Palos. Rice loves the pixelated hills, the valley oak in the center of every orchard, silos quivering in the distance, cubic tons of highway grit and thermal inversion merging to a point near Dos Palos, that whirl of wanting, one valley south, where inflorescence dangles heavily in the paddies like a pendulous goodbye. I've missed you like breath, like kernels of truth. Let's meet in the fields and grasp at heads of rice, turning ochre in the husks, while our central nervous systems vibrate and hum like idling harvesters, waiting for the fields to drain. Crop rose in autumn. This was part of a project that was a photography poetry project, and I was matched up with the photographer Adrian Mendoza, who he's known as the photoburnalist, and he's takes a lot of photographs of his old neighborhood in Bernal Heights. So anyway, he had a beautiful photograph of a field that had been, I don't know if it had just been harvested, but anyway, it was a beautiful black and white photo and inspired this poem, Crop Rose in Autumn. This is how faces fall apart, our eyes fixed to a point somewhere on the flat horizon. We walk in furrows of rich soil for years, for a lifetime, then start following the furrows to the clouds. This is how lives fall open. A man loves and hopes while his wife shrinks 1 acre per year. How love weaves out, a cotton rope tensing, then raveling into many frayed strands. Its shining moments leftover gourds strewn by the road after harvest. But we forge ahead like physics until longing dissolves the face, until systems of measurement are obsolete and we fix our eyes on the vanishing point. And I think that I have time for one more. I'm just checking my. Thank you. All right, this last poem is also a part of that poem photography project, and it was a lovely photograph of a little store on Crow's Landing Road in Modesto, and the poem is Donut Shop at the End of the World. Inside the donut shop at the end of the world, she fills the dishwasher rack with scratched flatware and ponders her life of food service. These waterlogged devotions, wants to believe her attention to the arrangement of utensils matters in the world. People demand spotless spoons to stir their coffee mate into bitter coffee. That old man out front is holy. See the focused way he washes that section of sidewalk, the way he scours the cement under the seats, clean as driftwood on the shores of this second-hand island. She and her hangnails shouldn't be surprised. This is a seminary for the streets. Wrinkled hands here in the water, fingering utensils like rosaries. The special of the day, a miracle, 7 days a week.
Hello, and thank you, 16 Rivers, for publishing my book and showing up today, and thank you, Book Passage, for inviting us to read. My first poem is going to be, and if you see me whipping out this paper, and those of you who were here before, don't worry, I'm not reading Mom and the Handgun poem. That was last week. That was so last week, as we say. This one is in the book, but this poem is dedicated to a poet who is very dear to many of us in the room, although many of us didn't meet him. Steve Coet, advisor to 16 Rivers, and just a great, blessed person in the poetry world. Anyhow, he, by the time my book had gone to proofreader and was just out into the world, he accepted this poem and then had some quarrels with it. And he said, will you change this? Will you change this? And I was like, of course, you know, just hysterical about wanting to have to see the poem in print. So if you look at the book, you'll see the inferior version. I'm going to read you the better one.
That's great.
This is called I'd Have Liked Some Dinner. That was a night when my father, I hadn't seen him in years, was to meet me in Manhattan. Certain place, certain hour. You've already guessed it, the hours they passed before the phone, that voice, drunken mumbling. He'd lost the last 2 letters of my number and trying every combination. Voila, and olé, he reached me. Could I get there? And did I have any money? And oh well, yes, I sausaged myself in the dark blue wool, quite proper, and walked forever to the 21 Club where Dad was being tossed out, raging, whining. I hadn't, I've told you already, seen him in years. The polite, oily men in tuxedos stuffed him into a taxi. We drove around, him hungry to show me, to have me know his old spots uptown, where most back then weren't dumb enough to tour at midnight. He tapped the driver to idle, nudging me. Here I danced Saturday nights, smoked the wicked weed. Here, a dame up there, as I sat cringing, but he's gone now. And oh Lord, that sad, lost night was a long time ago. The weird thing about this poem is when Steve and I were back and forth, he thought because of my attire, the wool dress, that I was a 40-year-old encountering her father. And I had to say, Steve, I was 20. It was lamb dressed as mutton. Reverse the phrase. So start with the first poem. Walking after sunrise. I'd go out walking your dogs, the both of them, big bruisers, and everyone knows I don't like dogs, the smell, the noise, and the drool of them. That year and a half you two spent dying, and I traveled the miles for the chance to see you, to be with you, to harvest every small thing for memory's larder. I walked your loony beasts, their electric collars keeping them on a virtual leash. Mornings, off we'd go, into the cold air's bright teeth, to the snowy field, the whole world enormous and quiet, just this side of what was approaching, while your pets, they peed and galloped, sniffed and pooped. The sky was blue, the winter landscape folding all of us into memory. You, me, thin sunlight, and the goofy, delirious dogs. This one was on Poetry Daily recently. Sorry. Murray. In this afterlife, they walk, but it's not quite walking. I'd say they approach with eagerness, not exactly as you remember them, but somehow better, at ease, having arrived at the essential comfort they longed for, so attainable in life, and now stripped of all that onrushing, kaleidoscopic existence, they've acquired a simple presence, and as you step closer, it's evident they'd each become what you hoped for, as you have surely turned into something they envisioned, your silliness and invasions, your rigidity included. But as you observe their faces, an endless calm, where once there was boredom or rage, adoration or bemusement, none of this matters, which is in itself a small sorrow. That their hunger for you to say something funny, sit for another hour, and feed their slavering dogs, that's all gone now. And there isn't a thing you can offer them, and nothing you can take back with you. And then this next one is called Daedalus. And I actually owe some of the ending of it to Jerry Fleming here, who cleaned my version of it up. Lots of us have somebody in our family or our acquaintances or friends who's a narcissist. My parents were not. They were deeply strange, but not narcissists. Not about them. Eve, Don, right? So I just thought of the character of Daedalus as, and also I have a persona poem in every book. It's just sort of a tradition. Daedalus. I go on, and what is a maker to do? I mourn, I go on. My handiwork melted and disfigured before my eyes, beyond all beauty and function as observed in the hummingbird, the vulture. But he was my spawn, my foal, my own sweet fool, whom I launched, and he failed us both, he did. For everything I make, something's unmade. Hurled west, old artificer, I unfurled my fingertips, which ached for the next thing of wonder, fated for me to set loose. As with my hands, I made these, airlifters, sky sifters, pummeled and punched the wax, articulated each sinew, doomed as I am to survive through my own sheer brilliance. Not my fault he was dumb as a bag of hammers, but mine he was, and it was my day. I'm uncontainable as air, and he was of the more perishable earth, of wren, sparrow, hawk, the many nasty dead things I learned from the owl as well as the starling. I taught him to soar, to use the wind shift, to float, dip, slice through crowds, but he screwed it up. And it wasn't my fault now, was it? There were fields of gold, and I meant to see them all. A father I was, but a maker too, and since these are the world's perfect wings, I won't take flight with others, not ever. And so we ascended, and he wasn't all that dumb, just heedless, and I buried him. I mourned, I went on. I fixed row upon row of feathers precisely as I saw the journey in my mind's eye, already existing, and it telling me to follow. Fierce thing, the mind. How about something a little lightweight? Lighten up a little bit? Okay. Yep. Got a couple nods there. So this is a very weird microphone. This is called Marriage in the Atomic Age. And you know, people tend to be careful about writing about spouses that can write anything about the ones they dumped. Marriage in the Atomic Age. He's broken the handle of the double boiler. She owned it 40 years, permitting it to carry her from young to middle to old, while it sat there boiling, warming, steaming as she sighed, whined, sang, or muttered above the fumes. It was purchased during the tenure of the ex, or previous ex, who knows. But this he, the best and final he, claims he'll fix it. She says, I'll find a craftsman, find some guy in a shop with tools, metal, soldering. But then he, hauling out his brain and skill cred, saying, I can do this, and her, nah, and his, yup. And she's all, you'll need goggles, a helmet, mask for the fumes, earplugs for your hearing, and for your hands, good mitts, want my oven mitts. Of course, the protective vest, the kind the jockeys wear on a thoroughbred running 40 miles an hour, and which I can easily buy down at the racetrack. Hold on, I'm driving there now, got my book on tape about the endless creation of St. Peter's. Centuries of design, creation, then tear down. Travertine and marble, build again, golden tile. Poison a pope here and there. Windows, glass, thousands of lives, commencing, ending, copper plate, amazing doors, many ducats paid out, the splendor of arch and fresco, glorious bells in the evening, tolling the hours. Okay. I think I have time for two more.
Yes.
Jackie?
Yeah, no, you have time.
Oh, I have a comment for you. I remember when your book came out and I was new to the press and you said, you really have to go over everything very carefully because, and I don't remember whether you had a book with 3 S's in glister or 3 M's in glimmer.
3 M's in glimmer.
So you'll notice that I just had 2 poems with slavering dogs, which, you know, I wake at night and worry about. So,
They were really slavery. What can we do?
I don't know, not much. The last section of my book is a lot of elegies for the farm I grew up. So they're very sort of quiet, bizarre, internal. There's not much going on. So I'm just going to read you one of them. They really are not great crowd pleasers, but I like them. And this is the opening to that section. Memory Palace. Sometimes you start with the room. That place of 4 walls, the door, tall windows looking out, one to the west, one south, enough light for joy. Sometimes you have to start with the room itself, not worry how the hours pass, how the room belongs to the house, which you know quite well. That staircase, hallway, the radiators rattle and smell of garlic frying, voices from the den, laughter from the yard. But you start with the room, how it holds so much of you, your breathing, your sleep, your reveries, and endless waves of dread. You glance out the window for beauty. A cloud, there's nothing like a cloud with its belly lit gold and rose at sunset. You're grateful for this room you come back to again. My last poem is a really long one. It's written in sections. It wanders around time. Many of us have dealt with people with dementia, and figuring out how we write about it and how we live through it and how they live through it is always difficult. And this was my attempt at it. This is called The Year, this is my last poem. Did I say that? I said that. I'm enacting the poem. The year with a hole in the center. He walks with a cane so as to chase the gravel, which trips him up. Who am I, he asks. Who are you? Do I know you? Tip-tap of the cane. I could live on chocolate and air. The summer sun through the damp air is a greasy stain, the whole sky sliding through its chosen universe. If there's any heaven at all, I've got my ticket. If there's no heaven, I've still got my ticket. I'm going there too. My father takes back his adoration for the world, refusing to name the dog, Max, the horse, Hawk, the smell of bacon, the nearly weightless ice clinking in the tea. Even the 6 stars, count them. 6 stars at night, and downstairs the fireflies, aren't they just a whole cityscape, as seen from above, on a long flight home from far away? I remember almost nothing of childhood, and neither does he. But oh, was he precise about how to clean a horse's tail? Never with a brush, use your goddamn fingers, one strand of hair at a time, until you're combing through silk. To be world-weary is to want to die, but never before sunset. To grieve alone is to fester, but to grieve in public is to enter the tide. A waste of life and talent is really no matter. At the end, when his mind slithered out of time, he wound the fat rubber bands 20, 35 around his hospital cane, around 5 hospital canes to protect them. In that hospital, he was tied like a madman, hands and feet to the bed. I was summoned from my hotel, and he called out, "Did you bring the knife, Stella, to cut me out of here?" Well, no. And he said, "You stupid, goddamn, silly nitwit of an idiot." To which gesture there was only one answer: to grab his shoulders and, looking into his green eyes, say, "You stupid son of a bitch, don't ever fucking talk to me like that, like that." It might have been exhilarating, but no, of course. It was a sad and very small thing to do and to be. In 2 months, he could walk the fence line, the cane in one hand, the broom in the other. 4 old bay geldings gallop to the fence, wheel and halt. Hawk whinnies, Chinook rolls on one side, jumps up, rolls on the other. "You own them," I say. "Oh yeah." In spring, to keep his balance, he counts the buttercups underfoot. In summer, to keep a hold of his mind, he counts the dandelions. Only when a life is done does it claim its shape from the myriad possible shapes it has been choosing all along. Twice a day the gravel must be swept, and again, and although there is no blessedness to grow toward, surely there is, and this must be purgatory. For those of us who are summoned to watch and wait, his fear recedes except when the leaves lift up. Not a breeze to be felt for miles. His eyes tighten against the onrush to the brink, to the wham, the kaput, the empty. Though the 4 bay geldings call out to them, he cannot name them. Late, he was always late, his pickup squealing around the corner, and to really piss me off, the hay bale stuck with pitchforks. 2 yowling mutts, the cigarette-throwing yips of flame, but alas, I'm the only wrong one here. Wrong coat, wrong hair, wrong shoes, all wrong to that smug suburban kid life, and him shrugging, to hell with the lousy lot of them. He drops my brother and me at the orchard with a gunny sack to crawl under the barbed wire, to loot the ripest apples, and watch out for the bees, the yellow jackets, the wasps, the owner and his friggin' dogs. Not because I much later realized we couldn't afford apples, but for pure sport, to sharpen our poor dumbass kid brains. And we had all that racket to boot. Cicadas and crickets drowning the warm September air, a distant Phillies game on his radio, the tinny engine we were forever running toward. Thank you.
I always do something to the microphone, literally every single time. Thank you so much, Helen and Stella. This is the third time that we've read together. And it's always such a pleasure to read with both of you. This is better. Yeah, thank you. Our last reading was actually in Modesto at the Barking Dog Cafe. And at this reading, I had an unexpected guest. I actually brought my 4-year-old daughter, and this wasn't something I planned to do. And I'm not one of those parents who thinks it's incredibly exciting to bring a 4-year-old to a poetry reading, and it wasn't. It was actually very terrifying, but it worked out fine. But on the way there, we played that game that I think parents play with their children when you're on a long drive, where you look out the window and you talk about what you see on the side of the road, out the window. And we saw many barns. And I realized that my daughter will actually be the first generation in my family, going back pretty much, I think, forever, to not grow up with an actual barn. And I realized I had a very conflicted relationship with my parents' barn, because it was sort of this place on their sort of large property that was like, it represented other, I guess, and everything else was very safe, and this barn was sort of nefarious, and it was literally at the property line. And when my parents passed away, my sister and I were sort of tasked with how to get rid of this thing that had been not used for any conventional purpose. We had these temporary cows and short-term chickens, and it was really, the barn was just used to store things that were discarded. So I didn't think about it that much, and then I realized it made its way into about a third of the poems in this book. So this first one is titled Cow Barn. What I cannot remember is how they took it down finally, the barn that I smoked in, that neighbors had stolen transmissions in, that my blonde mother hated and my sister once fired a .30-06 at and missed anyway, where our father retired broken armchairs and scratched tables, deep evidence of some congenital Lutheran frugality. That barn I could not clean ultimately. One last thing on the last summer of the last year on that world without end, the whole 2 acres of it, a world problematic and mildewed, one filled with suitcases for leave-taking, although not so soon and not in the way my parents left. And after, it was revealed that where the calf had danced fledgling hooves, the barn floorboards had rotted out, broken appliances were rendered inaccessible to disposal, and somebody, some distant uncle, suggested taking down the walls to remove them. And the resolution, as it is remembered by me, is a remainder. 4 baseboardless walls standing together at the horizon point of a pasture, joined by the edges and the splinters. So the drive to Modesto was actually great, because there was a swimming pool at the end of it at the hotel, and my daughter knew about this. The drive going back wasn't so easy because we were going away from the swimming pool. And so I did, again, that thing where I tried to explain to my daughter how difficult it was when I was a child, and I didn't have to really exaggerate about this, because my parents collected insects, and they collected moths specifically. So that meant that we could spend the whole day driving to whatever campsite we were going to collect moths, which generally fly during the night. So we'd be in the car for 9 to 12 hours, often in the Mojave Desert, to get to these places. And of course, my 4-year-old, it made no difference to her at all. But this is one of the poems about those long drives. It's The Mineral Kingdom. Just an hour outside of Las Vegas, the sky-chilled baker through winter nights, my cheek against the Ford glass, black and cold like that desert, nothing between December dead creosote and a sky that glittered like Drew's, mineral black gleam of coal or diamonds that shone in defiance, over the city of meadows, the defilement of the Vegas, meadows and desert both ruined and loved for the ruining. That highway marked my first illicit cleaving of loyalty, to the desert and to the mineral palace of my grandmother, her bedroom cavern aglow with silver and gold, diamond like a good clear liquor, ruby like pulse through the lips, and pearl, especially the pearl, which my father had reported were condensed tears, minerals ascended to heaven and cast down by condensation. to be worn by unwitting women who brought upon their bodies expensively tactile sorrow. To shed tears, he warned me, might mitigate the poison. Refuse to cry, though, and something else happens, and I'm here to tell you about that. And after the cancer, it's situated in his bile duct, domicile of held anger. Even a desert will wait for winter, he told me, and I waited, even for a desert. And just to go along with that theme of parent-child discord, this next poem is about my father and his mother, not the grandmother who lived in Las Vegas, but his very superstitious mother who was Southern. This is titled 100-Year Flood. Years ago, that grandmother closed my headache-darkened eyes and committed me to bed rest when migraine, like demonic possession, arrived. And my mother shrieked, and my father shook his lowered head so slowly, full of sad gravity and the recent revelation of a certain future for his oldest daughter, that Old Testament methodology, the firstborn, the blood sacrifice. What could have gone either way would now go the old way, the way of his mother and her mother, all nursed on laudanum and murder ballad lullabies, the damned matrilineal lot of them, who understood with a blood understanding how we needed dark rooms and frozen water and fortitude enough to understand that life would be long and we would spend it alone. What hung from her windows was solid as Denville carpet, substance enough to keep out sunlight, impermeable to the north winds, and hinged to high walls. And there was no sign of men in that room, or the most recent husband, a miner of hard rock, the so far survivor of cave-ins and fallouts, that already underground living man with a chance, so went the theory, of surviving my grandmother and her imperfect porous brain, encapsulated by a substrate through which only small things passed in the bilateral direction of memory, the father of all waters, the Mississippi, which crusted and covered and sometimes even drowned the banks of her home. The year of familial headache was the year my father struck me once, only once, when I painted my eyes blue Nile, the color not intended to appear whorish, but only to give the illusion that the difficult years to come were already at my back. But after the afternoon of the sick headache, my grandmother diagnosed us as exact and alike, having both been born beside bodies of water, as if the Pacific were as capricious as her south-flowing river. And I diagnosed her as superstitious and lacking in the knowledge of quantum mechanics that trumped the old physics of determinism, the belief in damnation, and the good common sense that if you keep a dead man's handkerchief, use it to drape portraits of ancestors. Do not make of a bedchamber a mausoleum for every male relative, dead of gunshot or whiskey or even love, but never of old age, the selfish dominion of women. And so she, that coal-eyed fox in the skulk, narrated on a Memphis afternoon the logic behind this certain prediction. Anyone I ever loved would die. And my father explained that his mother, well, a woman of unique properties certainly, had very little control over the entrance of mortality into a kingdom that had never been peaceable, and that both the weight of salt water and the currents of electricity exist in the human condition, the corporeal sludge that our risen Lord intended for us to rise above. And especially how, after the Old Testament, witchcraft had never existed in the world again. And my grandmother laughed and clarified that our blood, where it flowed into the Father of Waters, was delicate enough to divine useless prophecies. It was not the rich hemoglobin of the deep south, where iron stakes and red wine commingled in the garden before the flood. To tea leaves, she was illiterate indeed, but could prophesize from grains in the fissure of the Folgers coffee can. The future for anybody was precarious. She was a sorceress weighted with lithium in the sanitarium where her third husband delivered contraband Jack Daniels, the inauspicious poison that killed him, the man whom she had loved the most. And I asked her then why hadn't she left him alone, given her pre-existing propensity for fatality, and she said, "Sweetheart, I never said we can help who we love." But after that last dead husband, she retreated to the flood house where Confederate ghosts lived in closets, and where once when I was young, in the relative scheme of things, I asked her if I might write all of this down. And she watched, and I blushed and fumbled and found that I had no pen and no paper, only a handkerchief and a chipped stick of blue eye coal. And my grandmother touched a strand of hair which had fallen over my eyes and said, "Oh, sweet girl, it was already written such a long time ago." So Helen didn't read Her Mom and a Handgun poem, which I love. We're kind of deprived of today. But I do love every time she reads a poem, I always think about horses, and it's not, I don't know if you can see the cover of her book with a horse on it. It's not just because of that, but she writes about a region of the country that we have in common. And I always think, at least where my family's from, you can divide the families into two groups. There are families who have horses, and then there are families who had horses and who lost their horses. And I definitely fall into the category of a family who lost their horses. This is about being from that sort of family in California. On Monday morning, barely morning, only morning enough in one now still house to allow for the examination of this singular photograph. A child in breeches and Stetson, at his feet a leash terrier, and behind him the shoddy studio fabrication of the Cascades. He has the eyes of my mother, and her Mormon cheekbones and blonde hair, and is triumphant at this memento mori, this one photograph, having just pulled himself or been pulled over, one mountain range or another, with the knowledge now that if he needed to, he could pull down that same granite rocky spine, down to his dominion. Geology itself broke free. Granite assumed its birthright heavenward from the Earth's Precambrian crust, exceeding lowly expectations of this one terrestrial home. Those geologic peaks of the Cascades now point at God and suggest an equality of heights, while around them snaky chaos once oozed over the horizontal world, the weeping of Vulcan tears of molten obsidian that froze over the earth like a last-stand Cherokee, who fell fatally with a Carolina daughter, and was turned to glass, shattered and terrestrial and frozen and fallen, where they both once willingly fell. I turn the portrait over, where the unsurprising date, Salt Lake City, 1849, has been inscribed above the white space. It is a space as white as a temple room in that temple city, a white space, that prefigures every avenue of unclaimed destiny, the whole of the life of this one child. While on the third side of that held photograph, opposite and obstructed by the photographer's film studio mountain range, in the family of my father on the other side of the Mason-Dixon, a woman with morning cloak black hair draws shut softly the old drapery of centuries. Here is the two full memory chest, these drapes, the Confederate tapestry of sad weaving women, who wrote in sanguine thread with anemic hands and Cherokee thin wrists, stories of war and brothers who put arms around and took up arms against brothers, and buried lovers, and second sons of second sons, and even of being burned as witches on two separate continents. And this grandmother folds the threadbare skirt around slender legs in the corner by the Chesterfield with the view of this one ruined garden, which is exactly the same, ruined by all the same things, as the ruined gardens every family keeps in that red earth state even today, with crosses and ashes and the accumulation of anything that could be avenged behind blue-veined eyelids framed by the black hair of mourning that falls, as the years fall, into arteries insufficient to contain the weight of those years. Even centuries later, in the same room framed by curtains that now carry the detritus of 100 years or more, of time gone but hair like obsidian that remains and the same anemic thighs, a similar daughter plays, for the almost morning, Etta James, the anthem of blue women, of being up all night, enduring through the hour when even the stars fall back, of women who reign, of the dark city of our hearts. And it is evening, or it is afternoon, or it is July, or it is the coldest December in 100 years, or it is only and again Monday. I think I have time for one more. This last poem actually didn't make it into the book, but this is the second time that I've read it, so I think I have unrequited feelings for it. It's Interstate. Out of desire to die a little more each day, my mother's heart stopped in Tulsa, on the porch, and my uncle, still suturing detours into the hearts of sclerotic Mormons aside the Great Salt Lake, evacuated her to the correct side of the Mason-Dixon. She boarded an airline now obsolete, and my father drove his daughters west toward the Continental Divide over frozen Great Plains, and past the minute when endemic morning cloak moth gray scraped through night to peel back the limpid dermis of morning. Our truck's stale skin and the ruination of white paper bags, grease weakened at the seams as we stalked the structured heart of tornado country. And under a driftless overpass funnel cloud shelter, with brown recluse spiders and striated noctuid moths, my small sister huddled against my legs with the crossroad trucker and his bat-faced wife Astritis. "You just a baby chick," the trucker pronounced, and the devil got no interest in birds. And as the wind tunneled, I recalled how my great-grandfather believed that the devil was a funnel cloud coming up behind you. And we had already driven through Tupelo, where that grandfather's wife sat straight-backed in a scullery kitchen, unused since the war between the states, and ate with some congenital desire for the hereafter rat poison, 3 days after my father's birth. And I asked him, my father, how exactly then he did it. The drive with 2 daughters and a wife maybe dead at high altitude. And some silence persisted through at least a county line before he advised that if you do something once, you must never forget that you can do it again. "Pay attention, girl," he said, "to what you choose to do." And my eye was half then on the road ahead and half on the devil who followed the weather west.